Hey everybody, it's Dale Jr. on the Dale Jr. Download, and we got a great Ally guest segment for you today. Mike Curb is going to come into the studio. I've wanted to talk to Mike for years. This guy, he's been on the side of my dad's race car in 1980. I know nothing about that, but that man's name has stared at me for decades. And obviously we know that Curb Records is a big deal in motorsports. They've had success in music, obviously, but also the guy had a political career that I don't think a lot of us know about. And a heavy involvement in the 1984 July Daytona win with Richard Petty, his 200th win. We're going to hear all those stories and more. He's right outside. Let's bring him in the studio. The following is a production of Dirty Mo Media. Before we bring Mike in, I want to thank Ally for supporting us here at the Dale Jr. Download. They bring the guest segment to us every single week. We thank Ally every single week. We cannot do the show without their support. They've found some good value here. We hope that they are appreciative of our efforts. But they should be very, they should be thanked and celebrated by all of us because they invest in so many areas in our ecosystem, in NASCAR, sponsoring Alex Bowman, obviously, running commercials throughout the events. They keep this big machine going down the road, and it takes a village. It takes a bunch of people, and Ally is one of those entities that's very critical to NASCAR success and our success here at Dirty Mo Media. So we're very thankful. I've enjoyed reading this script every single week because truly most of the people, 99% of the people that sit down at that table are an ally. They are a friend. So it's a great connection. We're all better off with an ally, whether you're saving for a new car, a home, or a new vacation, whatever it might be. We're all better off with an ally. With all that said, let's bring Mike into the studio.
Hey, nice to see you, Dale.
Yeah, you too, bud.
Just sit here like this.
Right here. This is you.
I'll say hello to you.
Good to see you. How are you?
Well, great.
Yeah. I've been looking forward to this. We were lucky that you agreed to come visit us today, and I've been really looking forward to this interview. This is the final guest interview of the season, so we like to end on a high note, and this is going to be a lot of fun for me. Where'd you come from?
Today I came in from Nashville, Tennessee.
All right. What, you got any other business while you're in town?
No, I just came in for this.
No kidding.
It looks like I'll be coming back a week from Friday, though, for the I was the car owner for the Ty Majeski car, the truck that just won the championship. So we'll be coming back. Sharon will be your opening act, I think.
Yeah, that's right. So we'll be celebrating our championships together in Charlotte here.
And that's interesting. They asked me when was the last time that I'd been up on the stage for a championship. I said, yes, 44 years ago in 1980 when Dale won, and I received the trophy at that time, and I said, I win a championship every 44 years.
What do you remember about that night in 1980?
Oh, wow. It was.
Where was it?
The actual ceremony was in Daytona, Florida.
Oh, yeah. I never knew, so I've seen pictures from there, but I didn't know where it might have been.
Well, there were like 3 or 4 different ceremonies, and so I don't know if I was at the final one or not, but I received my trophy in Daytona.
Wow.
Which is a beautiful, beautiful occasion because it was so unexpected. I didn't even know at the start of that season that I was even going to be involved, Yeah. So
how did I guess we can go there. We'll get there eventually. Let's start. Let's just start back with where you were born, Savannah, Georgia. But you moved to San Fernando Valley at an early age. What was the move for?
Well, my father was FBI agent. He was in charge of the East Georgia Division FBI in Savannah, Georgia, and that's when I was born. And then he got transferred to South Carolina, to Charleston. He got transferred into Oklahoma, into Oklahoma City, just outside Oklahoma, later to Arizona, and then to of all places, Compton, California, which is right by Watts. So I got to start school which I loved. It was a racially mixed school, which was a beautiful experience for me, particularly for music. They all loved Mahalia Jackson. All my black friends loved those great soul singers, so I learned a little bit of how to play piano. Never like them, but I learned a lot about music, in the early days of living in Compton.
Yeah.
But my father was an FBI agent, so
Wow.
they kept transferring. Well, it was J. Edgar Hoover.
Okay.
It was J. Edgar Hoover was head of the FBI at that time.
Kept moving him around.
Yeah.
You graduated from California State University.
I actually didn't graduate. I went for 2 years.
Oh.
I went for 2 years to Cal State.
Why did you not graduate?
I wanted to. I wrote while I was when I was 19 years old. I was in my second year. I was interested in writing songs, and I wrote a song called "You Meet the Nicest People" on a Honda, and we sold it to the Honda Motorbike Company, and it became a Honda commercial.
Yeah.
So I decided to leave college and start a small company to make commercials and do music for film and records, and that was 60 years ago, and we're celebrating our 60th year.
That was Sidewalk Records?
Well, we called it Sidewalk Productions, Sidewalk Records, yes.
And so
we couldn't get the name Curb because
Really?
there was another company called Cub
yeah.
that was owned by MGM, so the closest thing we could come to Curb was Sidewalk.
Right. And so how did you eventually get Curb Records?
Well, as time went on, we were able to get the name cleared.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 or 6 years later,
Yeah.
it became Curb Records.
Sidewalk Productions initially started out mainly writing. Was just jingles? Was it
Jingles?
Did you know it was a jingle?
We did. Well,
Was it intentionally a jingle when you wrote that for Honda?
No,
No.
no. It was a song that I wrote, and then I met Bobby Darin, who was a singer, in an elevator over at Capitol Records, and he listened to the song and liked it, and introduced me to the Gray Agency, and then they made it the commercial.
Wow.
But the big commercial was Chevrolet. I wrote "Get on the Move" with Chevrolet.
Yeah.
Which was Chevrolet's theme for years, going into the 70s.
Yeah.
And that was when John DeLorean, I don't know if that name rings a bell, but John DeLorean was president of Chevrolet, and a friend of mine introduced him. After I wrote the Honda commercial, a friend of mine introduced me to him. He said, "I want a song for Chevrolet like the Honda song." So I wrote "Get on the Move" with Chevrolet, and they made it their theme.
How do you come up with the idea?
Oh, wow. I don't know. To be honest with you, I think it might have been John DeLorean's idea. I don't want to take credit for it. I think he might have said to me at the time, I think he said, "Mike, write a song about being on the move with Chevrolet."
Yeah.
So, get on the move with Chevrolet. Chevy's got the power to stay. The 70s are here today. Get on the move with Chevrolet. That type of get on the move with and I had my black singers doing, get on the move, doing the syncopation there.
Yeah. And so in 1963 is when you started. In 1969, you merged with MGM Records. So you're 24. How are you getting such great, incredible opportunities and networking? What was your secret, or what was your intention behind being so great at connecting, meet people in the elevator, turn that into something, be introduced to this person, succeed there, right? And you're building this reputation that would create these opportunities.
After I wrote the Honda commercial, I probably made a few thousand, but I rented an office and so forth. I actually lost my apartment and had to live in the janitor section of the building where I had my office. So I think the fact that I was starting out with nothing, was probably something that caused me to want to work really hard. So if I had a chance to meet John DeLorean, or if I had a chance to meet the head of MGM, I was ready. They say success is when opportunity meets preparation. Look at your whole life. Look what you've done your whole life. I mean, I remember meeting you out in Nashville, I want to say in 96, 97. Was it Gargoyles
Yes.
on your car at our fairgrounds? And I remember meeting you there.
Yeah.
And you were just you were under the car. You were doing everything yourself. You weren't. No one handed it to you.
Yeah.
You if anything, it's harder when you're son of. I remember Hank Williams Jr. was one of the first hit record songs I had that was a big hit. was called All for the Love of Sunshine with Hank Williams Jr. And we went to number one, and we were getting our award, and we were at a breakfast meeting, and a lady came up to Hank Williams Jr. and said, you're never going to be what your daddy was. And I thought, oh no, what's he going to say? And he stood up and he said, no one will ever be what my daddy was. But you know something? You know it better than anyone. When you build someone else's legacy, like I tried to do with Ronald Reagan, like you tried to do with your dad, you build your own legacy.
Yeah.
And look, I was just looking the other day. Did you know that this was your 88th victory, which is a great number for you?
Yeah.
The Justin's was the 88th victory for Junior Motorsports.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
No,
I was trying to figure out how, because I was trying to figure out I know the Chance 2, was 2003 to 2005, but I wasn't counting. I was just saying Junior Motorsports.
Right.
For 2006 forward, there were 80. This was Justin's victory, was the 88th victory, which is interesting because 88 was a number that you did pretty darn well with.
Yeah,
very well. But you had to make your own way. It's tougher oftentimes when you're the son, or because everybody's expecting you to go out there and be exactly the same. And when you build your own legacy, I just repeat what I said. I think when I worked to build Reagan's legacy, just as his state chairman, I ended up creating something where I ended up being in government, which I had never. So it's all, and you did the same thing. You built your own legacy, which is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
You know?
With it, when you merged with MGM, you'd eventually become president of both MGM and Verve Records, which you would eventually form Curb Records. You had a very productive life as a musician, scoring several films throughout the 60s and 70s. I mean, when I look back at this, you lived it. It doesn't seem maybe as unique or uncommon to you because you went through it and you lived it. But when anyone looks at this, how do you how it's just your life has so many layers to it. You talked about the political your career as a politician, as a record label in motorsports and so forth, but you went on from writing jingles to scoring films, and then you would find this includes the theme to the song American Bandstand, one of the most it's a most recognizable theme songs that anyone would know.
Well, that's why I started out. Basically, I started out trying to find a niche where I could put records on my small record label, which is now celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. So, at that time it was very small. Now our label is the largest independently distributed label in America. And what we have done, or what I always tried to do, was find a niche. And so in the early days, after the Honda commercial and the Chevrolet commercial and Sunkissed, Orange, I did several commercials. We started doing music for films where we would put the music in the film, give it to the producer virtually free, and then we would have the right to put the soundtrack album out on our record label. And so I probably did 50 of those, and that's what excited MGM because they wanted me to do the same thing with them.
Is this popular music?
Yes, like for example, with MGM, one of the first films I did was Kelly's Heroes with Clint Eastwood, and I wrote the theme song "Burning Bridges." That's still going today. That's still so. I think the niche that I was in was creating music for film, rather than just having to rely on whether your next single record would be a hit.
Right.
Which is why a lot of the companies have gone out.
And so. That was a unique way to create the record label,
right,
and have it succeed.
Right.
That laid the bedrock, I suppose, for your ability to then go out and find artists, take the risks that you're talking about on particular artists and records they create.
Right, and also to sponsor race cars in 10 different divisions and be co-owners and do all those kinds of things. I don't have, because I don't have any talent to build engines or be a crew chief or certainly don't have the talent you had to be a driver. But I do. I love it, and what I love is racing and music history. I love. It's exciting to me. Like, I'd like to be interviewing you. 50 victories, 26 in Cup, 24 in Xfinity. It's exactly 50, exactly your age.
Yeah.
It's exactly 50, exactly your age. 88, exactly your number. Your grandfather's number when he won the Sportsman Championship in '56. Ralph, 8.
Yeah.
I mean, 8 when you joined Hendrick, 2008. I mean, we have a condo in Daytona. We have a whole room of artifacts of you and your dad.
Really?
Everything, collecting all the different cars like this, and there's all kinds of interesting things we've collected, and people send us.
Yeah.
When your name is on the side of the first championship of what many people feel is the greatest driver in history. And to see when that happens, people are going to talk about it. Like we are now. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Right. And I want to ask you why you got involved in racing, how you got involved in racing. But before we go there, you talk about your involvement in motorsport today. Why does that work for you? Putting curb on the side of that truck that won the championship this past weekend in Phoenix, or on a wingless sprint car somewhere that's going to run throughout the Midwest. Why does that work for you? How does that support what you're trying to do?
Well, if you know about curb records, it's probably because of racing. Mm-hmm. The curb records has had a lot of hits. We've had probably 1,500 chart records in Billboard over the 60 years, but we're not like, and Motown had a sound. When you heard a Motown record, it could be the Supremes, it could be the Temptations, it could be anybody, Marvin Gaye, and there was a distinctive sound. My records are either country or they're pop or they're R&B or they're contemporary Christian. There's not a definitive sound like Motown had that definitive Motown sound. So I think Curb Records has gained a lot through being in motorsports over the years.
Yeah.
We couldn't use it we couldn't use Curb Records on Dale's car because I was in government at the time.
Oh.
And my company was in a trust.
Yeah.
So I had to do that as an individual. That was a whole
interesting
story. Sometime maybe
well,
today.
Hell, let's tell it. Yeah. I want to get to it. But where did your interest in racing develop? Where does that come from?
Well, when I was young, very young, I was dyslexic, which meant that I would read backwards. I'd spell my name, Ekenbruck, and so my parents were concerned, to try to figure out how's he going to get interested. And wasn't interested in school books or anything. So one day my mother noticed I had picked up a Motor Trend magazine while she was shopping, and I was reading it normally. And so they said, maybe if he reads something he's interested in, he's not dyslexic. So there was a tear out in Motors Trend for Speed Sport. Speed Sport, started in 1934. Oh. And so my mother for Christmas and my grandmother bought a subscription for Speed Sport when I had just moved to Compton, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, just starting school. And I read it religiously. I absolutely love racing history.
Yeah.
I think I can name every Indianapolis 500 winner, every Daytona 5. I know Dale Earnhardt Jr. won in 04 and 14. Mm-hmm. I can see it. I know those. I remember. For some reason, I picture records. I love music history. I love motorsports history.
Yeah.
I'm devastated about losing Bobby Allison.
For sure.
I even got to be with him one year on one of the cars, and it's just devastating. When we won Indianapolis 500 with Dan Weldon, and then we lost him later that year, or when Brian Clausen, that's the hardest thing. But I love racing history. My favorite driver back in IndyCar racing was Bob Schweikert back in mid-50s. 1955, he won the final AAA championship. He won the Indy 500. In '53, he won the Hoosier 100 on the dirt, and they had the biggest Silver Crown race of the year. I just remember all these things. I just love racing history. I'm excited about your history. 50 wins in the 2 top divisions. It's unbelievable, and 88 wins, not counting Chance 2. That's another 16. To me, I'd like to be interviewing you. I'd like to be but for me, it's just been a beautiful thing studying history and loving the history of it, because it's allowed me to, participate and in a lot of different things in racing that I don't even know how to describe.
Before you became involved in Dad's race team in 1980, what other involvement in racing had you had?
Really just local sprint cars. We were doing Kerry Agajanian, who's right next door. I met Kerry Agajanian at a Bible camp in Redlands, California, back in when we were both probably 8 or 9 years old. He's a little bit older than me, I guess. And his dad was J.C. Agajanian. And I was already, and so when I heard there was an Agajanian there, that was the first person I ever met where I knew the name, because I'd been reading Speed Sport. And then while we were there that weekend, they had that terrible wreck up in Pennsylvania in AAA, and Clay Smith, Roger Ward, who went on to later win Indianapolis, at that time crashed into Clay Smith, who was the mechanic for J.C. Agajanian, and Clay died. Mm-hmm. And I remember Kerry Agajanian's mother being really upset. So we spent a lot of time talking to one another, and Kerry and I started doing racing together, and then his dad had Ascot Speedway, and so I would go out there, and then I ended up sponsoring and co-owning sprint cars back in the 70s.
Yeah.
But I was doing it. Yes, I had curb records on the side of it, but I also loved dirt racing, and I loved it when the NASCAR guys came in. When the NASCAR West Series. It's gone through a lot of different names. Later it was K&N West, but the series back then, the NASCAR West Series would come out to Carroll Speedway, to Gardena Stadium. They'd come out to Ascot. Marshall Teague, I remember in 1953. I remember the pure oil Hudson Hornet. I'm picturing it right now. Running, we had such a great aerodynamic. I'm remembering that and saying, "Gee, I wish I could do that." And I tried a couple of times driving.
You did,
but I didn't have the talent. I just didn't.
But that's crazy. You tried.
I didn't have the talent.
Still pretty neat.
I didn't have the talent to do it. It was it was nice to try, but I didn't.
Where did you race?
It was most of the races where I mostly raced were just I got into the cars that I was sponsoring
locally.
Yeah. Just I tried. I tried doing hot laps.
Yeah.
I didn't have.
Sure. Yeah.
I didn't have what you and Tony Stewart. I didn't have that gift, but I had maybe a musical gift. So they say my father used to say, if you're good at one thing, do it. But I thought if I could do the music, maybe I could find a way to get involved in motorsports. Yeah. So I almost started with Bobby. It was really funny. Bobby Allison, the same year, in '79, I went to Bristol. Dale Earnhardt won Bristol, 79. And I was there. It was like April of '79. And there was a local businessman in California named Warner Hodgkin.
Yes.
Who was wanted, and he had made an agreement to sponsor Bobby Allison for 1980, and Bobby was driving the Budmore Ford. That was the number 15 Budmore Ford, blue and white, and he wanted me to do the hood on the car to put curb records or my curb or something on the hood. And I said, Warner, I've just been elected lieutenant governor. Ronald Reagan, I don't want to let him down. And in California, when the governor's out of state, the lieutenant governor is governor. I said, I think it'd be awkward for me to go on a race car. So I said, Warner, if I ever do decide to do it, that's who I would love to do it with Bobby. I followed his career back to the sports, followed him in the modifieds and everything, So I said I'd be thrilled to do it, and I forgot about it. And then in January of '80, Les Richter had been one of the co-chairmen of my campaign where I was elected lieutenant governor. And Les Richter, I was a huge fan of his. He was the NFL legend. He was the Rams back during the Norm Van Brocklin day when Norm Van Brocklin was quarterback. He was, to me, Les Richter was larger than life. The fact that he would be my co-chairman and help me get elected. It's hard for a Republican to get elected in California. And you need people like Les Richter. So Les said to me, Bill Franson, I want to talk to you. And Les had asked my wife Linda, who's here, to be he asked us way back then to be the Grand Marshal for Riverside. Riverside used to be the first race before Daytona. So in 1980, I'm trying to recall this exactly, but in 1980, my wife and I were the Grand Marshals of the Riverside Raceway. So we came out on the Friday before the race. All right, so on Saturday, Bill France Jr., Les Richter said, Bill France Jr. wants to have a meeting with the three of us. And I said, what is it? He said, we want you to get involved with a car. And I said, I already told Warner I couldn't do it for Bobby. I said, what do you want? And he said, Dale Earnhardt. And I said, well, what is the problem? He said, well, Dale was injured in '79, as you know, and didn't get to run the whole season. Also, Osterlin didn't run the whole season. And in fact, Pearson got in the car and won his 10th Southern 500 that same year. But Dale was back in the car for the Riverside race, and they said, well, we want you to talk with Dale, but Dale wants to run the whole season, and Osterlin is only committing a partial season at this point. Maybe he'll run the full, and we're wanting you to come in as essentially as a sponsor.
Yeah.
But and so I said, well, have you talked to others out here? I mean, I mentioned Warner as a good example. I said Warner. He said, well, Warner's doing Bobby, so we'd like you to do Dale Earnhardt. So I said, well, wait, my company, Curb Records, is in kind of a trust because I'm in political office now, so I can't put Curb Records on it. They said, well, do you have a private company? I said, well, I have my Curb Productions. They said, well, put that on the side. And they said, also politicians in the South put their names on cars. Anyway, so first of all, saying no to Les Richter and Bill France Jr., it is impossible. I mean, these
they don't give you a chance.
I love Bill France Jr.
Yeah.
I mean, he is so amazing. And Les Richter. Anyway, so I said,
talked to Dad?
We went to the pits and we talked to Dale and great talk, but I don't think it lasted more than 10, 15 minutes. But we talked about it. Of course, I knew a little bit about his history. I didn't know, he had raced in 75, 76, and 77, but like maybe one or two races. So I didn't know much about that. And he hadn't done Busch series or at least I had never seen him do it. But a lot of his racing was regional, so I hadn't had a chance. I'd heard all about him, and I had seen him, and I actually seen him once at Concord, at the old Concord track. I had been out there with a friend of mine, and I had seen him, and I watched him find this groove that nobody else could find. So I knew that he was a genius. But I didn't realize exactly what I was getting into. But I said yes. And then I also said, let me ask you this. I had promised Warner, I told him that if I ever did this, I would also I'd do something with Bobby. And so Bill France Jr. said, well, why don't you put Hodgson on the hood of the Earnhardt and you go on the hood of the Allison?
Is that how that happened?
Yeah. And so I said, well, how would that work? And so, Bill France, and I could talk about the Petty thing that he engineered. Later on, when he called me in '83. We'll talk about. I mean, Bill France was a genius. I mean, he brought racing into the TV age. But I mean, what he was. But the thing about Bill France is you could not say no to him.
That's interesting because I had no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it's right there on this car. Somebody painted this car. Yeah. From a piece of wood was probably bought and painted in 1980.
Yeah, and that Hodgson car, if you look at for the whole season, it said My Curb on the hood.
But Dad's car has Hodgson on the hood.
Yeah.
My Curb Productions on the quarter panel.
Yeah.
And so we talked.
I've never seen that one with. That's an interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to take a picture
little
of
custom work there. But I was talking to somebody, and we talked about it on my show yesterday about Bobby and Dad were very close.
Yeah.
They started out. Well, Dad would always say in all these articles throughout '79. That Donnie and Bobby were the ones that were always really helpful. Who could he go up to in the garage and get an honest answer? Those were the two names that he would throw out all the time. Yeah. But they were almost sub-teammates, if you will.
And I'd say I'd add a third name, Neil Bonnet.
Yes.
The three of them, and it's so funny seeing the three.
That makes so much sense, how they would interact as much as they did, because there's all these pictures of Dad and Bobby talking in the garage from the 80s and 79, 80s, and it was probably encouraged or they were kind of drawn together because of that connection between you and Hodgson and so forth. Yeah,
and so I
had no idea.
So basically what happened was we made the agreement that I would put up the money for the Dale Earnhardt car, and we would put Hodgson on the hood, and then I would go on the hood of the Allison car, which had Hodgson on the quarter panel. And then we left Riverside, and I went back to Sacramento trying to be a good lieutenant governor in California. When the governor's out of state, the lieutenant governor is governor. And I almost didn't go to Daytona that year, but then all of a sudden I said, I better go. And I went there, and the day after I got there, Dale won the Busch Clash in a curb car.
Yeah.
And then Bobby finished second in the 500, and Dale finished fourth. Mm-hmm. They finished second and fourth, and I must say, as a race fan, I was pretty cool. Buddy Baker, I was cool with Buddy Baker winning that.
Of course,
it was kind of like when your dad won Daytona. Finally, the whole industry erupted. I think it's funny. My wife wonders why I was kind of hoping if we didn't win it, Grant Enfinger had won the regular season championship for us, but not the overall. And I've seen him, like Justin Allgaier, Grant's tried so hard. So I was saying, if Ty doesn't get it, I hope Grant gets it. So I'm still a racing fan, but we almost won the Daytona 500 with Bobby that year. And it was pretty exciting.
For sure.
So I got to. So from that point on, it was like, wow. And then, of course, he won Atlanta, and he won the Charlotte 500, and then Martinsville, and then Bristol and Nashville. He won Nashville, too. I mean, it was called the Music City 420.
Yep.
Actually, back then it was called the Busch 420, it's now it later became the Music City. So, I mean, it was like, the whole thing was so surreal that I don't even know how. You've had experiences like that. I mean, this weekend with what happened with Justin.
Yes.
It's like surreal to go down 2 laps and to have suffer 2, maybe 3 penalties. Really 3 when you think about it, or 2 penalties at least, and then the speeding, and to see him come back from 2 laps back. There would have been people who would have parked the car.
He wanted to park. He told me.
Yeah. Oh, did he?
He said, I wanted to park it after that last penalty.
No, but when you see that's, to me, that's racing. I'm more excited about things like, I was excited when Buddy Baker won in 80.
Yeah.
But having said that, when you have cars with your own name on it, finishing second and fourth, we were in it.
You were in it
all the way. And from that point on, as soon as I finished my term in government, I've been doing everything I can, in racing, whether it's World of Outlaws, USAC, IMSA, NASCAR, IndyCar. We were second in the Colton Herta was second in the IndyCar championship. He won the final race at Nashville. But one of the things we also did, and I saw Kerry's office, Kerry and I, it was Kerry's idea, started a Curb Elite program years ago to take young drivers who've never had a chance. And the first 5 drivers that Kerry came up with were Christopher Bell, Kevin Swindell, Kyle Larson, and Rigo Abreu. And so when we went to Daytona for the Battle of the Beach in 2013, we had a Curb Records car, and we put Kyle Larson, who'd never been in a stock car, never been in, and he won the. He won the there before. But he won the All-American late model division of the Battle of the Beach in a Curb Records car. And that was his first victory at Daytona. Now, if you say to a historian, what was Kyle Larson's first victory at Daytona? Well, they would probably say when he won the Busch race. I think was it 20 was it 19 or 20 2009 when he won the Busch race. But his first race at the Speedway actually was Battle of the Beach. And no one wants to hear that statistic, but it was fun for me because it was fun to work. And Kyle drove our midget, our USAC, and won 30 races in it. So we knew what he could do. Yeah. And when we put him in the stock car, we didn't know Ganassi was going to grab him so fast, but he did the right thing.
He did. What got you involved in politics?
Ronald Reagan.
How do you know Ronald Reagan?
Well,
back then.
Okay. I was at an event. Obviously, as my company started to succeed, I did some charity things, and we do a lot. Our foundation does a lot of charitable things with colleges and so forth. In the early days, there was a group called Junior Achievement. It's got your name, Junior Achievement. It's a group that teaches free enterprise to kids in 4th and 5th grade. Okay. Right? So they asked me to come and speak, and I'm not a very good speaker. So I was speaking there, and the next speaker was Ronald Reagan, and the guy who was supposed to introduce him was tied up on the freeway, which is what everybody in California runs into. So they set a card saying introduce Ronald Reagan. So I introduced him. Not a great introduction or anything. And then after he spoke, there was like a round table where you all sat. I don't think he was there for more than 30 minutes. They give you like the rubber chicken, but I was sitting at a table with maybe 8 or 9 people with him. And he said to me, he had seen back in 1972, when I had a real big hit record with Sammy Davis Jr. called The Candyman. It was, and I produced it, and it was Sammy Davis Jr. singing with the Mike Curb Congregation, which was my group. And Richard Nixon had asked that record be performed right outside the convention. Reagan had been at the convention and he had seen that. So, or someone gave him a card and said Mike Curb was the guy that did that. I don't know, because maybe he knew I was going to be there, but he said during there, I loved seeing your group and seeing Sammy. He said, I'm going to be running for president. Would you be interested in finding some entertainers for me? And I said, sure. Just like you, I said to Bill France, sure. Right. All I did was say yes. So I said yes, and then a couple of days later, they asked me to do that. And then after a while, out in California, it was getting kind of testy because he was running against Ford, who had become president because Nixon had resigned. So Reagan said, we want someone young at the top of the committee. So we're going to ask you to be the co-chairman. They had an older lady who was one of the co-chairmen, and asked me to be the other co-chairman of the. That was several months later, and I'd been helping them with entertainers, but he liked me. He actually treated me almost like a son, but he liked me, and he said, I've looked up your background. I'd like to see you become a co-chairman of our California. So in '76, I was the co-chairman. And then after that, he lost to Ford, but he carried California. And so because he carried California, he could name who is the national committeeman. Uh-huh. And so he asked me to be the California national committeeman.
What is that?
That's the person who represents the party to the national committee.
Okay.
So you have the National Republican Committee in Washington, D.C., and each state has a committee man and a committee woman. The national committee woman, I think, was Nancy Pelosi, because she had been with Jimmy Carter, who was another fabulous person, by the way. My wife and I just got to see him, I'd say 3 or 4, just before he started having his health problems because of Habitat for Humanity. But we had some really great people like Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan. But in any event, then he asked me to be national committeeman. Well, when I was working as his chairman, my job was to put a chairman in each, or a chairperson in each of the 58 counties in California, which I did, and he liked those choices. So then he said, "Why don't you run?" I said, "Well, I didn't graduate from college. I don't have my grandmother was Hispanic, but she was a huge fan of American government. She came over, put herself through college, loved the American political system, and she used to force me to watch the conventions. She was a Democrat. She would force me to watch the conventions, Democrat, Republican, to where I learned a lot from her, and learned a lot from going through public schools in California, and learning a lot about the beautiful diversity. Mm-hmm. California has beautiful diversity: Hispanics, African Americans, Asian. So I learned a lot about that. And anyway, whatever it was, they came to me and asked me. They didn't feel they could win the governorship because Jerry Brown was popular, but the incumbent lieutenant governor they thought could be defeated. They asked me to run. And I looked at it and said, no Republican had ever won and served a full term with a Democrat. And the state started in 1850. So there were millions and millions and millions of people. There are 30 million people in the state, but millions of people. No one had ever been elected as a Republican and served a 4-year term with a Democrat because they knew Brown was going to be reelected. Well, I ran and I won. I won the primary and I won the general election. Now, I did reach out to all the different diverse groups, which a lot of times Republicans sometimes don't do. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But being in California, being in the music business, my friends came from everywhere. Mm-hmm. You can't name anything that we didn't have one of at least. So that was good. I was able to win the primary, and then I was able to defeat the incumbent lieutenant governor and become lieutenant governor. And then Brown decided to run for president, and the Supreme Court made me acting governor. I served for the first 2 years of my term. I served over 200 days as governor of California.
So what is that responsibility comparable to?
Awesome. When I was talking to my wife about it the other, because she's been on this whole ride with me, for 50 years, and she was having babies during that. I mean, both of our babies were born. Both of our daughters were born while I was serving as acting governor. And there she's up on stage one night, and the next day she's having a baby. I mean, of course, we learned that about our wives, right? If men had the babies, there'd be no babies, right? With the respect you gain for your wife when you watch her have, you saw that, and I saw that too. But we were just talking about the other day when we would fly over California and say, my goodness, we have responsibility for 30 million people. You take it seriously. And, it was, I enjoyed it. And then after my term was over, I went to Washington with him.
Yeah, with Ronald.
Yeah, with Ronald Reagan. And that's where we had the little interesting interface, which I'll talk to you later about with Bill France and Richard.
Yeah. So what goes into the decision, I guess, on your future? So you're elected the lieutenant governor. You're acting governor for over 200 days. Could you have decided at that point, I guess, to make a career at trying to remain in those roles, or was there like, okay, that's we've done that, now we're going to do this, or would Ronald call and say, hey, I need your help, come to Washington?
Well, Reagan asked me to come to Washington D.C.
Why?
Well, first of all, number one, I have to tell you, I was not reelected because I didn't run for lieutenant governor.
Why?
What I did, I was lieutenant governor, but then I was acting governor so long that I decided to run for governor. The only problem is when I ran for governor, I also had to get through I had to beat the attorney general, who had been a state senator for 20 years, and we kind of split the vote. So I didn't win. Yeah. Even though the polls showed me way ahead, I didn't win. And I thought, something? That's devastating. Well, it turned out not to be, because that night I endorsed my opponent on that very night. I said, look, I got into this. I said, whichever one of us wins, we'll endorse the other. So I endorsed him. The next day, or 2 days later, Ronald Reagan called me. He was already president then. And I had been his co-chairman when he ran for president, the second time when he ran for. So he called me and he said, Mike, I want you to come back to Washington. I want you to do in all 50 states what you just did in California, which is to unify the party after the primary. Because you see what happens. You saw, after what happened with Trump and Nikki Haley and DeSantis, there's always that period afterwards where they need to either come together if they want to win in the general. And so Ronald Reagan asked us to come to Washington, and we had 2 small kids that had just been born while I was acting governor. And we said, do we want to spend our life running for political office, or do we want to get back in our record business and get back in our motorsports company and get back in and so I said to Ronald Reagan, yes, I'll come to Washington as long as I can have my businesses. And he said, well, I will appoint you to jobs that don't pay a salary. He made me his representative on the USO board. He made me his representative on the International Trade Relations board. And most of all, he asked me to chair the RNFC. So it was a fabulous experience for my wife and me and our 2 young daughters who had never seen snow. And while we were there, also we were close to Charlotte. We could fly out of Reagan Airport to Charlotte. So, and of course, if you look at the framework of this, when I was elected, it was 78.
Yeah.
When Dale won his first championship, it was 80. We couldn't continue on in 81 because I was serving as acting governor.
Yep.
So I couldn't get into the sweepstakes of JD, whatever it was, Stacy, JD Stacy. And I could fill you in on some of that too. But there was a lot of stuff going on between Osterlin Childress and JD Stacy because Richard Childress is a very, very close friend of mine. I knew what I wanted to see happen, and it did. But anyway, I didn't mean to get off on that. Where was I? I was talking about.
What I want to ask you is this: so we all, I was young, but I lived through Reagan's presidency. You had a very close.
Well, you would have been 3.
Yeah.
You were born in 74. He was. He became president in. You would have been 6.
Yeah.
So you lived through it.
I did.
Do you remember him?
I do. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. The impact he had, huh?
Yeah. Well, he did. He left an incredible mark.
Yeah. Wow.
What I want to ask you, what it must have been like to have such a close relationship with the president of the country, and who was he really as a human being, as a person? The
best. He was he was like you. He could be with all your mind-boggling success that you've had. You come across as to everybody. My wife wanted to adopt you the first time she saw you. We didn't have a son. We said, so, you became not just Dale's son, you became everybody's son, and I think that Ronald Reagan had that same thing that you have. It's that, where people feel like you're the guy next door. Mm-hmm. You're not trying to put them down. You're not trying to be an elitist. He was just, we even wrote 2 or 3 songs together sitting in the back seat of his car. Of course, I was from the entertainment industry. He was from, he had been an actor. He had been in 43 movies. But he sort of treated me like a son. There's no question about it.
What was the age difference?
Substantial.
Yeah, it was?
Well, yes. Well, just to put it, I was the only person, when we had, in 1988, when we were developing the Reagan Library in California, I'm the only person alive today who was at that meeting.
Wow.
And I'm 79.
Yeah.
I'm 79 years old.
Yeah.
So, that's another interesting number too. 79. That was when Dale first got in the Osterlin car.
Yeah.
But 79 years old at that time when I was elected, I was 33. I think 33 years old. I was the youngest person ever to be governor or whatever. So, and for years I was always the young guy in the music industry, or the young guy, at the racetrack, or the young guy in the music business. Now I'm not, and it's really freaky.
It is freaky.
I could be your father.
Yeah.
And I wish I were, but honestly, But problem is, if I'd been your father, you wouldn't have had those genes. You would have had the same problem I did when you drove a race car. You wouldn't have been able to find those cushions, and so you wouldn't have had those genes that are so rare. God, so rare.
Yeah.
But I mean,
when you go to Washington and you worked on what it sounds like, just a myriad of projects and support of whatever was necessary. Right. Let's talk about how all of the worlds came together, all of the different narratives or entities came together for Richard to become your driver, right? And how he's, Ronald Reagan is in Daytona in July for that 200th win. I had Buddy Parrott, who was the crew chief on the car at the time, sit here and tell me how it was kind of like all of those things were put in the right places, like a chess match. And when, of course, Cale Yarborough could have beat Richard to the line, and none of that works out, and it's not storybook, but it ended up being perfect. So,
did Buddy tell you what a good relationship the two of us had? Buddy Parrott?
Yeah, I think he was very favorable. Yeah.
Yeah, because it was a beautiful experience.
He was a good dude.
I really liked working with Buddy. Yeah. I'll tell you how.
So what happened? So why do you? Richard's going to leave his family team, right? He's going to drive for you.
All right. So here's what happened. All right. Now, 1983, my term ended as governor and lieutenant governor in early 1983. Mm-hmm. All right. I've now moved to Washington, D.C., right? And meanwhile, we still have our shop in Kannapolis at that time. We had a shop in Kannapolis that we had put together that we had I want to say, well, it's since torn down, but have you seen our building there, the big building?
Yep.
We had a small building, but it was right where they were building up the campus for North Carolina.
Yes, sir.
So they needed to tear it down, and David Murdoch, who owned Cannon Mills at the time, was my neighbor.
Really?
Well, Reagan had a ranch up in Santa Barbara. My wife and I bought a ranch just outside of L.A. because we wanted our daughters to have horses, and we wanted them to have a normal life. We didn't want them to, So anyway, so to put it in perspective, all right. So now we're living in Washington. I'm serving as the chairman of the RNFC and representing Reagan and various things. All right. So Charlotte in and I was at the race. I went to the Charlotte race because it was easy for me to get to, and we had a condo in Charlotte or in Concord. So, and my wife and I love going to North Carolina. It was an easy thing for us to do in Washington, D.C., get on a plane at Reagan Airport. So we went to the 1983 in the Charlotte race. It's around October 5th, not the 600. Oh, God, I'm thinking of you running out of gas.
Yeah.
That was, how did you expect your fans to deal with that one?
I was just as devastated as they were.
That was the 600, too.
It was.
I know, but I mean, see those things that we mentioned, Algar. I'm a race fan. I'm a fan of yours. I'm a race fan. But but we never got over that one. But I'll tell you though, when we got over it was when our car was running second in the Indianapolis 500.
Oh yeah.
And the leading car hit the wall on the corner, and we slipped in and won the race. Yeah. So my wife said to me, that gets you over those moments. Mm-hmm. We had that happen with Ty this year. I think it was Martinsville where the final lap he ran out of fuel leading. But I mean, it happens. But anyway, so what happened there, and I don't know any of the details other than there was apparently a discrepancy with the engine.
Yep.
And I told you I have no talent in that area, so I'm not making any judgments one way or another. But what did happen is they made a decision to penalize the brother and not Richard.
Yes. Richard kept the win.
Right. It would have been like if somebody had penalized Dale Earnhardt Jr. in Talladega. You saw what happened with the cans and everything. There would have been, they can't. There's certain things you can't do in the sport. You can't take Dale Earnhardt Jr. out of the race. You can't take Tony Stewart out. You can't take Richard Petty. In 1983, taking Richard Petty out at a time when some of the other superstar drivers were starting to retire.
Yeah. And that was Richard's, I think, 198th. He was getting close to 200.
It was his 198th victory, and they made it this decision. Same decision they made like with Austin Dillon. They let him keep the win, but they took away the championship run. Well, they did the same thing here. They let Richard keep the win for his 198th win, but they penalized the team.
Yes.
And so so there I am, and I'd already gone back to Washington. I had to go back that night to Washington. I got a call from Bill France Jr. And he said, Mike, I have something I want to discuss with you. And I said, what is it? He said, well, do you still have the shop in Kannapolis? He said, I'm told you do. I said, yes. He said, do you have some of the chassis? I said, well, I bought I have 2 Monte Carlos and 2 Ols, but I don't have all of them. Some of them might have been sold to J.D. Stacy.
Yeah.
So I don't, but I have. He said, but you could build a Pontiac on a Chevy. I said, well, that's over my pay grade.
Yep.
I've got 4 chassis here. He said, well, look, I've got a driver that I want to put in your car. And I said, well, who? He said, are you sitting down? So I said, okay, I'll sit down. Who do you have in mind? He said, Richard Petty. And I said, why? He said, well, didn't you see where he was penalized? I said, well, I didn't see where he was penalized. I saw where his family was. I said, well, they're not going to be able to run. I said, what are they going to do? He said, well, they might run Kyle Petty, but I think Kyle was in the 21 at the time, and he had just won. I think he had just won. That might have been the year he won Richmond.
Yeah, I think he was driving number 7. 7-Eleven car.
Oh, was he in the 7-Eleven?
Yeah, so he was kind of still in a family car at that time.
Well, when he went, I thought he went with Sabatis after the 20. Did he go to the 21?
It was late 80s.
Oh, but didn't he go to the 21 first?
84, 85 maybe.
All right, so then he was in the 42.
Yeah.
Not the 7, or was he in the 42?
He was in the 7-Eleven car in 83, 84, I think.
But that was the 42 car then.
Yeah, it would have been, yeah.
So it was still the Petty Motor.
He was still with Petty.
All right, because they had talked at that time of the possibility that he might go to Wood Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
That he had other opportunities. Yeah. And Sabatis was already in the picture wanting to do something with him. That didn't occur to much later, though,
sure.
Right? So they didn't know if Kyle was going to stay with the team or not. But that wasn't the issue for me. They were going to keep a team and run Kyle. And I guess that you're right. You're better at history. I thought I was good at it. You're far better.
No.
Was it 7-Eleven at the time? Did they stay?
I can't remember what he. So in '84, Kyle may have ran. I think in '84, Kyle might have ran. Gosh, racking my brain.
Well, 79 is when he won the ARCA race at Daytona, because I was there. But in '84, had he? So
when Richard left the family team, I think that Maurice ran a Ford with Dick Brooks. It was a white number 1. So he kind of ran like a very limited schedule after that. But then
was it 4 or 44?
Number 1.
Oh, it was the number 1 car.
A white Ford.
Okay, so
I think they still kind of ran. They might have ran Kyle, or Kyle might have went somewhere else. I can't remember.
All right, so Maurice then ran a Ford. That's interesting. Yeah, and now I vaguely remember seeing the Petty name on the
Dick Brooks
Dick Brooks,
his final few races.
Yes. All right. Okay. Well, then here's what happened. They asked me if I would resume my team, because I was now out of political office. They had liked the experience we had in 1980. Mm-hmm. Bill France liked the fact that I did what he wanted, and we had a pretty nice result.
Yeah.
And I'm not claiming any of the credit. I mean, I've already said I'm not a driver. I'm not an engine builder. I'm not a crew chief. So I'm not trying to take credit for Dale's championship. But it had been a nice experience for them in the way we had funded it and how we had worked the thing out with Warner. And because a lot of those guys like Warner Hodgson and Rod Osterland ran into serious business problems, because in California we had a huge savings and loan crisis in 79, 80, 81. And it really hurt people like Rod Osterland. It really hurt people like Warner Hodgson. It really a number of those guys really got hurt. It didn't affect the music industry. People were still buying, even when there's a recession, people want to listen to music.
Yeah.
So basically those guys always kind of got over their heads a little bit, or a lot.
Yeah.
But a lot of them did. But at that point, Osterlund had already sold
To J.D. Stacy.
and he had sold to Stacy. I should fill that in a little bit
Go
first
ahead.
here, because on the Stacy thing, this was something Dale did not want.
No.
And
So JD, if I could interrupt you, what I believe, and I only can piece it together. I wasn't living it like you, but I'm thinking that Neil and Dad having a little bit of a friendship around 1981. Also, Dad's own observation, but Neil drove for J.D. Stacy in 78, 77. J.D. Stacy bought the 71 K&K Insurance Dodge from Crenniff.
is that the Dick Marcus?
Dave Marcus.
Dave Marcus.
Yeah.
Dave Marcus drove, yeah.
And so Neil gets in that car
Yeah.
and drives it for about 3 years.
Right.
And I think Neil might have gotten Dad's ear and said, I don't know if you want to be – I don't seem like the kind of guy that I think you'll get along with. But either way – or maybe Dad just had his own opinion. There's a picture of Dad and J.D. Stacy at the car before the July race in Daytona, and Dad is miserable. You can see the look on his face. J.D. Stacy's standing there with a cigar about 12 inches long sticking out his mouth and has some kind of a Wrangler sticker taped to his cowboy hat. It just didn't look like the kind of guy Dad would want to be in business with, but my opinion.
Well, first of all, I don't know anything about J.D. Stacy, so
Really?
I can't say anything derogatory about him, but I can say what Dale Earnhardt told me, which was, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, Dale, at that point, Wrangler had taken over, so there was no need for curb, and I was fine with that. I mean, I offered to stay on the B panel. I offered to do all kinds of things to stay on it in 81, but I believe that Rod Osterlund was already thinking of selling.
Yeah.
And I think what happened when Rod was able to attract a Wrangler and to make the deal for Wrangler, I think he felt that the value of his team, having just won a championship, that this was the right time to sell.
Sure.
And again, I like Rod, and I think basically he was having issues financially at the time.
Yep.
So obviously this was a great opportunity. So I didn't want to stand in the way.
No,
the only thing is there was a clause in the Wrangler agreement that said if Dale was not the driver, Wrangler had their approval
To leave.
for or to get a replacement driver.
Yeah.
So you're correct. In July, I was at the July race, and Stacy was the car owner. And you have to remember, another thing is, you know better than I, when it's one thing to draw a contract to sell your team, it's another thing on the day that NASCAR recognizes it, because there's all kinds of things where the points transfer. Mm-hmm. Do they transfer over? Do the 43 points transfer over to Curb, or do they stay with Petty Enterprises and go to the 42? Do the points for the 2 car? Does that translate into? Can J.D. Stacy take that over and have those points? It has to be approved by NASCAR. Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at the first 6 months of 81, you'd see that even though, I mean, you saw Daytona where Childress was drafting your dad, they were 3rd and 4th, almost won the race. And you could see that Childress and your dad had a personal relationship like Neil Bonnet. I mean, you're in the garage, you're seeing him with Neil Bonnet. You're seeing him with Richard Childress. Looking at the Richard talking, so the bottom line, and Richard Childress was a friend of mine. I had met Richard, and I really, really liked him. He drove the CRC chemical car, and I identified with him because I'm an independent record person. He was that independent guy that probably finished top 10 50 times, but never got to really visit. He did. I think he won at Bowman Gray one time.
Yeah,
he's a talented guy, but they almost drafted their way into winning the 81 race at Daytona 500, and they finished 3rd and 4th. But I could see there was a relationship. So I always knew that Dale was not going to drive for Stacy.
Yeah.
He said he was not going to do it. And the way he was the kind of person, your dad was the kind of person, if he said something, he meant it. He wasn't a phony.
Yeah.
He didn't just make up words. He said, I'm not going to drive there. I'm not going to go there.
Yeah.
That was what he said to me, period.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to. What should I do? And I said, what are your choices? he said I could get in Richard's car. And I said, well, I love Richard Childress. The only thing is, are you going to take Wrangler? He said, I can take Wrangler. So by the time they reached Michigan in 81, the team was Richard Childress Wrangler.
Yeah.
And so the thing that was so fascinating is for 6 months, they didn't get the transfer to Stacy. Stacy probably didn't have the transfer almost until maybe the July race or maybe the Pocono race. But Richard got the transfer through in a week.
Wow.
And so when they went to Michigan, it was Dale Earnhardt in the Richard Childress Wrangler car.
Yeah.
And number 3.
Yeah.
It was number 3. It was no more number 2.
No.
Richard wasn't looking for number 2. He didn't need it.
Yeah. No.
He didn't need it. So that's what happened. Now, but then for some reason, Wrangler wasn't satisfied with what was going on. So the Bud Moore thing came along, and they felt that the Bud Moore team, and there was some Wrangler and Ford were doing whatever it was. As you know, they made a 2-year agreement with Bud Moore, and Dale drove, as you know, your dad drove in 82 and 83 for Bud Moore. All right. And we love Bud Moore. He was a hero, American hero. Served our country with dignity. And we had been on his hood with Bob. We love him, but it was a jolt. It was a jolt because we were with Richard. Yep. Now, so what they did is they ended up flipping driver. He put Rudd left the Moore and came into the Childress car, and Rudd did okay.
Yeah.
But your dad didn't like the Bud Moore thing. He won Darlington, but that's a driver's track.
Yeah.
He won Darlington that year.
Had a lot of engine failures and frustrations.
Oh, yeah.
Bud built his car to be driven a specific way, which was successful.
Yeah.
But Dad didn't drive in that style. And Bud was always trying to dial Dad back, and Dad wanted to run full throttle.
Yeah.
But so
he did. So he won maybe the one race Darlington in '82, and he won a couple of races in '83. But there's no question your dad wasn't happy. So that's when he asked me to come to Charlotte. He picked me up at the airport.
Dad?
Your dad picked me up at the Charlotte airport, and we had arranged a meeting in my condo with Richard Childress. Now, Richard, I sent you a video. I don't know if you saw it, or I have a copy of it. Richard did a video where he talked about it, because for me to sit here and act like I'm taking credit for Richard Childress and your dad is ridiculous, and I'm not going to do that. But Richard, I have a video that I could show you where he felt I played a big part. But here's what he said. Your dad was trying to decide if he would go back. All right, it was 1983. And it was right about the time that I was doing the Richard Petty. The Richard Petty was up around October, right after the October 5th Charlotte race.
Yeah.
So isn't that interesting? Wait till you get to be my age and you got to remember all these years.
Yeah.
You're doing very good. I got to go back 60 years. But you do it really well too. But I'm just trying to remember. It was around October, latter part of October of '83. And I'd love for you to talk to Richard about it. But what happened was we had a meeting at my condo, and Richard wanted Dale to come back.
Oh, yeah.
And he wanted Wrangler to come back, period. And he had all kinds of, and General Motors wanted him to come back. Chevrolet wanted him to come back. And Dale had to persuade Wrangler. And that's the real issue, was Dale. If Dale went, Wrangler was going to follow. Mm-hmm. But it was something where even Dale wanted to be sure, and there were other opportunities. There were 2 or 3 other teams that, as you know, and these are things you know more than I do, because you know what other teams he might have been talking to. But he had already been a champion, and everybody, even in Bud Moore's car, winning Darlington, it was pretty impressive, right out of the box. So he could have picked a lot of different teams, but in any event. My job at the meeting was to try to bring them together, learn everything I learned from Ronald Reagan, because there were issues that where they had to come together. I think that the respect that your dad had for Richard, and the fact that they liked each other, they liked to hunt together, they liked each other, and respected each other. It was just a matter of, could they convince Wrangler that they were going to build a championship team, and I believe that I helped them on that. Richard Childress has said I helped. Mm-hmm. But look, sometimes when you're just part of something, just to be part, to feel that you were part, of bringing them together is a great feeling.
Yeah, of course. After Charlotte, Bill France Jr. calls you and says, "Hey, man, I need you to help me get your team get going. Yeah. Richard Petty's going to drive your car." Are you telling me that Richard finished the year driving your car? Or was this he was going to get in your car in 84?
No, 83,
yeah.
The same month that I had the meeting with Richard Childress and your dad, was the same month that I got the call. The race was, Charlotte was October 5th. It was the next week, so it went around 11th or 12th, where he called me and where Bill France called and told me about this opportunity. I then came down to Charlotte, so I was there, in Charlotte, and so I was at the same time this was going on with Petty, the Childress Earnhardt thing was going on, because it was all for 84. Now in 83 he finished out the year with his family. They allowed him to finish the year, and then because there was no way we could gear up quickly in time, so we geared up and we got Robert Yates to build the engines. And that's another story because he was signed to Dyguard and they were building Fords, So getting them to build a Pontiac engine was a fascinating thing. But Robert Yates building the engines, Buddy Parrott was incredible. All right, we put this team together operating out of our shop in Kannapolis. We built up the shop as much as we could. We bought land, which is where where our big building is, where we have our museum and where we have the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame. We were trying to build up and trying to get ahead of it, which is hard to do when you start a team in January. And the first race is in Riverside at the end of January. But in any event, we did it. And by the time we got to Dover, we won our 199th race.
That's right.
Okay, all right. So now we're moving on and thinking, oh my goodness, the 200th victory could happen
any moment,
and it could happen in my car. Now it's a different thing. It's like, all right, now we were in a position to try to make it happen. So we tried every way. I don't know what more you can do when you have Yates building the motors, and at that time, we tried everything under the sun to have our car ready for Daytona. Well, all right, now what happened at Daytona? So I'm in a meeting at the White House. Now I'm living in Washington, D.C., right, with my family. I'm in a meeting. There's 7 or 8 people, and we would meet periodically with the president to talk about what he would do. And he had appointed me chairman of the RNFC. So, and that committee raises funds. So I would always want him to make appearances for something that might be good for the fundraising.
Yeah.
All right. So I mentioned, why don't, he was looking for something to do on the 4th of July. I said, why don't we plan an event maybe we could do a fundraising event in Daytona, but maybe you could come down and just attend the race. You wouldn't, because he was concerned on that very day. In fact, he ended up canceling the concept of the fundraiser because he wanted to lay a wreath at Arlington. The 4th of July, as you know, that race didn't always fall on the 4th of July.
Yes.
That year it did. So he decided that he didn't want to do a fundraising event in Florida, and he decided he wanted to lay a wreath in the morning at Arlington. So then the question is, what else could he do? So in the meeting, I said, well, what about coming to Daytona? Because then it was 84. He's running for re-election. Daytona was one of the swing states. This year there were 7 swing states.
Yeah.
Florida is no longer a swing, but at that time it was a swing state. So I said, what about if you came to the race? There'd be 100,000 people. They all love you, and everybody in the room turned around and looked at me like, going to an auto race? All right. So we forgot about it. And about 20 minutes later in the meeting, Ronald Reagan said, I used to call sprint car races before I was an actor in Des Moines, Iowa. And he said, I saw those 2 guys fighting. And of course, I knew he was talking about Bobby and Donnie, and because
in '79 in Daytona.
Well, what Bill France's motto. He said, I don't want any fighting of any kind unless it's a week before my race. So he showed that video of Donnie and Bobby and Cale over and over and over, right? Mm-hmm. So Ronald Reagan had seen it. So he said, I enjoyed that video. He said, it sounds like it's a pretty exciting sport. I said, well, you should consider coming. He said, well, I would consider it. You'd have 100,000 people. He said, but I would rather not speak. Maybe I could. I said, well, what if you sat in the booth? Ned Jarrett will be there. He's like the guy next door. And I could prep you on all the different Obviously, I knew all the car numbers and everything. I could prep you on all that. So anyway, he said, I like the idea. So I went back to my office there, and I called Bill France Jr. This time, I said, Bill, are you sitting? Because he said to me,
yeah.
And he said, Mike, I'm really under pressure. He said, I can't sit. He said, if you have someone you want to bring, just let me know. I said, will you sit down? I'm going to tell you who it is. So he said, I'm sitting down. I said, it's Ronald Reagan. He said, oh, I won't repeat the word. I won't use the four-letter words here, but it was several of them in succession. And he said, are you serious? I said, Bill, I've never been more nervous in my life, because if you come up and this doesn't work out and you announce it, you're never going to speak to me again. And Bill France said, I'm going to come up there. And what Bill France did.
What did he do?
He met with the security people. He
came to Washington.
Came to Washington the next day. He met with the Secret Service, and he's. I'm sure Jim knows a different side of the details. I've talked to Jim France about it, but the most exciting thing was that Bill was just a genius. The same way that I couldn't say no to him. Everybody in Washington loved him, and he put it together. I opened it up. But Bill France put it together logistically and with himself. But then by then, all of Reagan's people got involved, and Reagan had a lot of good people as well. And so it was quite an exciting thing. But for about 2 months there, I wasn't sleeping, because I was afraid if there was if the president got sick, or if there was a security issue, or
it just doesn't happen.
And it doesn't happen. Who do you bring? I'm sorry we couldn't bring Reagan, but here's who we brought. So so basically, it was a scary thing, but it happened. And then when his plane was coming in, it was right over the top of the 43.
Yeah, that iconic picture.
Yeah, and I introduced him. I introduced him to Dale, and we snapped a picture. I don't have it, but we snapped a picture of Dale.
I was there.
Oh, were you in the picture?
I don't know.
Well, you were in there when
I
we
was
were having
with
the
y'all.
food. Yeah.
After the race, we all ate Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Of course I do.
So when we I talked about this on the show. The race happens.
Yeah.
Everybody's thrilled. Richard Petty has won his 200th win. Even me, and I'm not even. I mean, I was a Dale Earnhardt fan strictly, but everybody was completely happy with the end result. Right. Usually, races are over and everybody leaves.
Yeah. Right.
But we're hanging out, and Dad changed his clothes, and me and Kelly are there, and I'm very young, maybe I guess 10 years old at this point, 9 years old. We're like, what are we doing? We're going to eat with the president. And we're like, no kidding.
And so Kentucky Fried Chicken.
We went over to this big giant tent, and it was in the infield, in this big giant tent. At least it felt like it was in the infield. And there was box lunches of Kentucky Fried Chicken, maybe a thigh, maybe a leg bone, I don't know. But I remember, and I sat down, there was these long benches of just folding tables and chairs and cheap stuff you'd see at a family reunion. And we all sat down, and there's Richard and there's Ronald Reagan, like 10 feet away from me. And even at a 9-year-old, I mean, I knew exactly how big of a deal that was.
And you see, I arranged for Bobby to sit next to him.
Bobby did sit next to him.
I arranged for that. Bobby Allison said, Mike, there's one thing in my life that I want more than anything. And I said, what? He said, I want to sit next to Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
And I said, I'll tell you something. That may be one thing. I can't build you a car.
Yeah.
I can't tune your engine. But I think I can arrange for you to sit next to him. Would you be willing to take him around? Just kind of take him around. Richard
wasn't a...
Well, he didn't want to do that type of thing.
You mean mingle, introduce... Is that what you mean?
Yes. In other words, Richard didn't say he wouldn't do it. First of all, Richard won the race.
Yeah.
And so there were all kinds of things going on.
Richard had responsibility.
Also, Richard was a huge Reagan fan, and Reagan really liked Richard.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem that Richard had is Richard had taken Reagan around. People are talking to Richard at the same time talking to Reagan, whereas Bobby was in a position to just kind of move him around. So I said, Bobby, if you'll take him around, I'll arrange it. and then you can sit next to him, and that's how that happened.
Damn.
So that's one thing I did.
Very smart.
But I'll take credit for that one.
So
I can't take credit for too many other things, but I'll take credit for that one.
So this is all
kind of crazy. Isn't
crazy to have the stars all aligned for all of that to work out perfectly.
Yeah. God is in there somewhere.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
My wife and I are Christians, and we think that God creates those opportunities. It's our job to go in and do it. But there's a sense of miracle in some of these, just the chances of being with Reagan or being with your dad or being with Richard Petty or Bill France. These things, I don't know. I just feel like we're put in those positions like you were. You're put in the position, but look what you did. Look what you did with the gift that God gave. Look what you've done with it. When you take 88 wins, not even counting Chance 2, which is another 16, not even counting the 50 victories in Cup and Xfinity, you put all that together, your numbers and your dad's numbers, when you add in the car owner and everything else, come out pretty close.
Oh,
and you're not trying to one up your dad, and that's what's so beautiful. But as you have built his legacy, you built your own, and I think as I worked to build the Reagan's legacy, I had then that opportunity to have maybe my own opportunities in government that maybe someone my age would have never had. And I think a lot of it is when you being around people like Les Richter, Bill France. My father said, "I'll know you by the company you keep."
Oh, yeah.
And you've seen so many of these people, even people we've talked about today, who are here today and gone tomorrow. And not that they're bad people. They get in over their heads. They make commitments that they can't follow through with in some cases. And I've never wanted that. I'm the same as you. I wanted a marriage that'll last forever. I wanted to have people in my company who have been there 30, 40, 50 years. Like I've wanted to follow what my father said, which I'll know you by the company you keep. If you get to meet Ronald Reagan, that's a good thing in government. If you get to know Dale Earnhardt, I wasn't as close to Dale as I was to Reagan, but just being around him the times that where he was so focused. I mean, his eyes were so focused. Everything was focused on. If you were talking to him in the pits, he was totally focused on that race, and he was thinking of his setup. He wasn't thinking of the people he was talking to. So, but he's a genius, and he had the genes. I guess all I'm saying is all these opportunities that you've mentioned. I haven't had anybody do an interview that has gone into all these areas at one time. This has been kind of fascinating for me. So, but I do think that God has opened up these opportunities for both you and me, and here we are all these years later. I mean, here we are going to a NASCAR banquet, winning championships. Yeah, and you've got all these years ahead of you, even more after I'm gone. So
I have to know. So when all of that's said and done, the day for the choice for Ronald to go, in the conversation, going back to that meeting that y'all had where you brought up the idea of him attending the race, it's a massive success, right? Does he ever say, when it's all said and done, does he call you the next day, or?
Well, yes, and more than that, there's a tape that I'm going to leave with you where when he was announcing the race, and the 43 car looked like in the final restart looked like it had a chance to win, and Ned Jarrett said, "Well, have you picked a favorite?" He said, "Well, I'm kind of a conflict because Mike Kerb and I have done a lot of things together." When he would say things like that, I left you a tape of it because we've never. The Childress tape was something he did when I was being. They were honoring me for mental. We were raising money for mental health, and we were trying to help some friends. And Richard did a video because they were honoring me, which was the last time, because it was. That's those things, as you know, when people call and want to honor you, it's a nightmare, right? All your friends have to get them. But they were doing that, and Richard did this video, and so he told me I could use it any way I want to use it. But in that video, they had a piece of where Reagan was at Daytona calling the race, and he talked about his relationship. So those kind of things, I think it's better for Reagan to say what he thought of
Sure.
me, but he's done that. But I will tell you this, that he treated me like a son. I mean, appointing me to be chairman of California, but later on, I was the national chairman, co-chairman of his presidential campaign. I was his chairman for the convention program.
Yeah.
It just seemed like he just appointed anything that didn't pay a salary, but he appointed me to all these different things. My wife and I, we were talking about the other day, I said to him just before, when he just was retiring, before he had the issues, I said, why did you do this? What did you think? Why did you do this? And he said, I trusted you and you never let me down.
Damn.
And I think you would say this, that if your dad said that to you, which he probably did.
That's the best compliment you can get from a guy like that.
Right. You don't expect your dad to say, oh, I like this and I like that and you're the best. Yeah. But if your dad said, I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
And I think he did. He certainly said that to me.
Yeah.
He said that to me in one of the visits I had with him. I said, isn't it amazing with Dale Jones? He said, yeah, something like I'm really proud of him.
Yeah.
Did he say it to you, I hope?
Oh, a few times, maybe. Yeah. I knew where he stood for sure.
Well, my dad was an FBI agent. He was also not the kind of person to say all kinds of, particularly when you drop out of college or whatever. But he was, my father at the end of his life was happy with what I had done, And your dad was like over the edge, just, realizing what you've done in your own right. So I really thank you for inviting me to be part of your podcast.
Are you kidding me?
I've really been, and by the way, I could spend more time if you want.
Yeah. Do
you have more questions?
Well,
I'm enjoying this.
Yeah.
I'll stay all night, actually.
I did want to ask you, it's you going, fast forwarding from 1984 all the way through the years, and here we are today. You've had an incredible amount of success in the music business, and that has blossomed and exploded into from where it began in the 60s to where you are today. It's an incredible accomplishment. And you're still heavily involved in motorsport. I see Curb on everything. And I guess, what's the motivation? You could at any moment at your age say, I'm tired of working. I'm ready to just do nothing. So what's the motivation to continue?
Well, what we're doing right now, or what happened Friday night when we won the truck championship, dominated, almost the entire race. Mm-hmm. The idea that there's still things to do, but more importantly, all the people around me sort of depend on what I do. Just like think of all the people at JR Motorsports that depend on you having the willingness to keep going.
Yes.
I mean, what is this, the fourth? I guess if you can't count the Truex, it's your fifth championship, right? And so I mean, basically, and you've had several others where you should have won it and deserved to win it. But I mean, is 88 victories or 88 plus 16, if you count the chance to, when is enough? I don't think it's a matter of numbers for you or for me. It's the idea that I could be Tony Stewart's partner when he started his dirt track team, and follow it from USAC all the way up to what we're doing with Donnie Schatz 25 years later, or Casey Kane just passed his shop here. We started together a open wheel team, and now Brad Sweets won 5 World of Outlaw championships, and now the inaugural High Limit championship. I don't want to stop doing that. Now, if Tony called and said, I want to stop, I know he stopped the NASCAR, but he doesn't want to stop the dirt track car,
right.
And I think he loves it. But I've told Tony, I'll stop when you stop.
Yeah.
But unless he calls and says, I want to stop. So I think these long partnerships that we've had, like with Michael Shank and IMSA car, it's not just the championships we've won. It's the idea of starting with Michael Shank and then winning 3 24-hour races.
Yeah.
With him, the fact that we started and we struggled for so many years, it makes it exciting. So all the teams that I've been involved with for 20, 25, 30 years. So I don't want to stop unless they want to stop. And if they want to stop, obviously I will. But why stop? You're not thinking. I'll bet you when you're at my age, you'll be doing
still going
what you're doing right now, and particularly if God gives you the health.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
and if you take care of it, and we're careful what we eat and everything.
Yeah.
But I mean, you got to stay out of those private airplanes and stay out of those GT cars too.
Yeah.
That you gave us two real scares
Those
there.
are scary moments.
Did that cause you to rethink some things? And
yeah, a little bit, not so much. And I mean, I don't know. It definitely helped me appreciate life and how fragile it is.
Yeah.
What about? I've always loved music. I've always, music is part of every day of my life. Everywhere I go, I prefer to have music playing. I love I love exploring. I love the discovery. And it never ends. As long as somebody's making new music, there's always new music to discover. And it just changes. It can change your day, your mood. What do you love about and so I say all that because I felt like I used to tell people back in the 20, 30 years ago that if I hadn't have made it in racing, where would I legitimately have tried to put my efforts? And that would have probably been in the music business as a scout of sorts. I would have really enjoyed discovery and trying to help artists and connect artists to labels. What about that is exciting? Like I'm not sure exactly what your experiences have been like in your life, but when you find something that nobody knows, when you find an artist or a song or a sound that is unique and you can't wait to share it with the rest of the world, and that it's an A+ sound, what is that? Compare that to something. Tell me what that feeling is like when you have that discovery moment, and then when it realizes its potential, and it is received well by the public.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt what you've just said for the last couple of minutes because that's beautiful. It's almost like a testimony of how you might have considered a career in the music business, which is fascinating. Because I was going to ask you, do you play an instrument like piano or guitar?
I pedaled with the drums years ago, but I never was very successul. I ended up, I quit doing it because everywhere I went, people would ask me to play, and I never thought I was played well enough to jump on a stage in front of a couple hundred people or whatever and play a song. But I did enjoy playing the drums. I had a set in my house and played a lot of Creedence and John Cougar and stuff like that, and pretty simple stuff. But
fascinating.
Yeah,
I feel like changing sides with you and interviewing you because this is very exciting. Because this is something. There are a lot of people watching this, and 99% of them are your fans, and so they're more interested in what you're saying. I would say to your fans, this is exciting to hear that if you had another career, you would have considered music. And I would say to you, you don't have to play an instrument to be in the music business. Some of the very best people who have been with my company for many, many years, 30, 40 years, are people who just love music. Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned John Cougar Mellencamp. You mentioned Creedence Clearwater Revival. All right, we're talking, of course, 60s, 70s. It's fascinating how similar that music is to what country music is today. You listen to 70s pop and 60s pop. You listen to, but a good example is your example. You listen to Creedence Clearwater, listen to Proud Mary. Tell me how that differs in terms of the feel with today's country.
Yeah.
So I would say to you that you could be successful in the music industry because, as you say, you like music. You finding a talented recording artist is exactly like finding a talented race driver.
Right.
Where do you find a driver who's young, Where do you find, and if you look at your own company, look at the Noah Gregsons, and you look at the drivers over the years, the Truexes, the people that have won championships with you over the years, Byron, we could name them all, Reddick, we practically named them right there, Chase, Chase Elliott.
Yeah.
You take the championships that you've won. In some cases, it's a young guy starting out that you could really identify with, like Chase Elliott, because Chase Elliott is following the Dale Jr. thing. He's got the advantage of the name, but then everybody's expecting him to be Bill Elliott.
Yeah.
So he's got the name, but he's got to go double to prove it. Well, you could help build Chase Elliott, and you did, and you built him into a driver that had almost as many popular driver awards as you've had. I don't know if how many. I haven't counted all those. I've counted your wins.
He's headed there, yeah.
But you knew that there was something special there, whereas Truex was that blue collar guy like Ty is, like Ty Majeski. Mm-hmm. He was that. With the dad was a different kind of race. Just a short, never really got into the big leagues like your dad and Billy Elliott did. But you take what you've done with these every one of your championship drivers. Look at Reddick. Reddick's grandfather owns Broken Bow Records.
Yeah.
And when he was just starting out before in NASCAR, he had a chance at North Wilkesboro to get into Kenny Schrader's car for a K&N North race.
Yep.
And they asked me, his grandfather asked me if I would facilitate that. I said, well, I don't know Kenny well, but if you get the car, I'll sponsor it. And they listed me as the owner. That was his first victory.
Oh.
I was listed as the owner, but all I did was put it together. But his grandfather wanted him to be in the music business, and he ended up selling his record company for a lot of money, and he would have loved for Tyler to have done that, but Tyler had a dream to be the next Dale Jr.
Yeah.
And he's pulling it off.
Oh, yeah.
He's pulling it off. And so I guess all I would say is the same gene that you have that has allowed you to discover these young drivers and convince them to join your team, and then put a quality product there that they can win championships with. Surround them with that, because they can't do that on their own. And you're able to do that for them. That's the music business is the same thing. You find we've got a young driver now, a young recording artist named Kelsey Hart. Mm-hmm. He's got a song called Life With You. And it's kind of how I felt when I got married years ago. I wanted to do life with my wife. And here's a guy with a song saying, I want to do life with you. And it's connecting. It's already gold, and it's not even in the top 30. Or Dylan Scott would be a better example. Dylan, by the way, loves racing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if you followed him, but there's the guy that to me, like Tim Duggar, but he's a younger version of Tim Duggar. Dylan Scott, he's exploding on our label right now. And there's no difference in what we're doing with Dylan Scott or what we did with Lee Brice or what we're doing today or what we did years ago with Tim McGraw. For 23 years, Tim McGraw was with us. And now, look, Tim McGraw left after 23 years and went with my next-door neighbor, Scott Borchetta, but Tyler Reddick left and went with Childress, right?
Yeah.
I mean, drivers sometimes...
It happens, yeah.
You understand it. I mean, in 2008, you made a huge decision to join Hendrick, and you made the right decision. But another 8, all these 8s, but in 2008, you made that choice. Well, you made the right choice. You made the right choice because he could give you a product that you felt could go take you to the next level.
Yeah.
And you felt you could also take him to that level, and he felt that way, and you did. Yeah. Well, so I guess all I'm saying is it's very similar. What Rick Hendrick did with you, what you're doing with what you're doing, what you did with the various drivers I just mentioned, who you won those 5 championships with, is the same thing I do when I find a young artist like Dylan Scott. I try to put a team around him that can make sure that his records get played on the radio, mm-hmm. and that he gets the opportunities. We put Tim Duggar on the truck that won the championship.
That's right.
On the deck lady.
Yeah, he wanted me to tell you hello. He was really excited about this episode.
Well, I love Tim Duggar,
Yeah.
and Tim Duggar has built a career around racing.
Yeah.
And he's not trying to be Tim McGraw. He's trying to be Tim Duggar.
Yeah.
And that it's like you mentioned Dick Brooks, or you mentioned Richard Childress when he was a driver. Some drivers were content to drive as independents and did it their whole lives. Dave Marcus was, and I remember Bill France Jr. saying, we can have super teams, but they're never going to fill the second half of the field.
Yeah.
The second half of the field has to be those people, and out of those independents might come the next Childress.
That's right.
But it's hard.
Yeah.
But it's possible. But I mean, so I would say to you, you'd be a tough competitor for me if you went into the music business.
Yeah.
So why don't you do it?
I don't know.
Why don't you find an artist?
I don't have any experience. I mean, it's like I wouldn't open a restaurant, expecting to be successful if I didn't know how to run a restaurant. But I do feel like that I have. I do feel like when I hear good music, and I know when I hear something unique or special, and like I say, I mean, if I had maybe committed myself in my early 20s to being a grunt that was out on the beat, going into the clubs and listening to the bands and trying to find something special somewhere in these small towns around the country, that would have been probably a thankless but a very fun, fruitful existence. And maybe that would have turned into something different over time. But I would have enjoyed, I love the discovery of music. That's the best part about it.
Well, you've talked about your love for music and how you could do this, and what you've done obviously as a car owner and as a driver, and what you've done on television, what you've done with NBC and what you're doing with the podcast. I would say in many ways you and I probably have both tried a lot of different things. It's safe to say we've both tried. The one thing that you and I have in common is we don't give up, and second of all, we've made sure that while others around us have done things that we wouldn't do and we've seen them make those mistakes, we've tried not to make those mistakes. We've tried not to get in over our heads.
Sure.
We've tried not to get in. You said the magic word that you don't know how to run a restaurant. Well, neither do I. I love to eat. I love to eat at restaurants, as you can see. I've been trying to lose a little weight, but I've always said I don't want to do something in a field that I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's why I've literally studied racing history. I follow it. I'm just as excited about Ralph Earnhardt winning the Sportsman Championship in 1956 as I am about us winning with Ty Majeski in 2024. I love racing history and I love music history, but I wouldn't want to get into a restaurant just for the same reason that you don't want to get into it, because it's not our expertise. We're not cooks. We like to eat, but we don't like to be cooks.
Yeah.
And chefs, and some of the best restaurants are run by chefs that know how to make special food. But I think the real key is to find something you love.
Yeah.
Whether it's one thing, two things, or three things. And if you love being in the music business, find an artist and call me, and we'll develop. Find a new artist, and we'll with your contacts and mine, we'll develop the artist.
All right. If I find somebody, I will.
Find the next
your
star.
Attention. If you don't know how, if you want to open a restaurant but don't know how to run one, you partner with somebody who does. That's an alternate route, which is what I did with the Whiskey Rivers in the airports. I can't thank you enough for coming today and giving me your time. I have seen your name on the side of that race car that my dad drove in 1980, and I have heard your name thousands of times in conversation with friends, through motorsports, through music, obviously my relationship with Tim Duggar, and you have always sort of been in the ecosystem, but I've never had the chance to really sit down and talk to you. And I'm very thankful that I was given some time today to spend with you and just one-on-one so I could be curious. And what a fascinating life. You went wherever the wind blew you, and you took advantage of all these incredible opportunities, and you set in a really cool example for people that have ambition, and you made things possible for yourself and succeeded in so many different areas that are totally unrelated, but at the same time oddly related, from politics to music and motorsports. It's I've really, really enjoyed this. This was everything and more than I hoped that it would be for this final episode of the season. Mike Curb, thank you.
And thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
I really enjoyed this. And I have felt the same way, by the way, about you. I mean, partnering. If you want to be in government, partner with Ronald Reagan. If you want to be in racing, partner with Dale Earnhardt, with Richard Petty, Richard Childress. You know what I'm saying? If you want to be in whatever the sport in music, partner with Dylan Scott, partner with Lee Bryce, partner with Tim Dutt, partner with someone that you can work with and who can take you to the next level where you can help them, but they can help you. It's like my father said as an FBI agent. He didn't make a lot of money, but he was a very, very good man and loved our country. And he said, I will know you by the company you keep. Yeah. I would say you've lived your life that way. I've tried to live my life that way. And let's both keep partnering with in life as long as we have life.
That's right, buddy. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Mike Curb on the Dale Jr. Download. All right, so great conversation with Mike Curb. I got to tell you, man, goodness. The guy, at a very, very young age, doesn't finish college, writes a jingle, writes another jingle, keeps, creating and builds a business, sells that business to MGM, becomes president of MGM. I mean, we went through it. He has this, just the career in the music industry alone is fascinating. But we didn't get that deep into that because he had a career as a politician and because he's also had a career in motorsports. One thing we also didn't get to talk about, 2006, he purchased a house in Memphis, Tennessee, which was once owned by Elvis Presley, and they renovated that house and turned it over to the Mike Curb Institute at Rhodes College. So his charitable initiatives and efforts there to invest and better his communities all across the country, everywhere he's been. I don't know the countless things that he's ever, the dinners and charitable auctions and dinner. He's been to probably more than he can count. Just fascinating, just a fascinating guy. Listen, he's he gets on and goes and goes. You got to steer him back toward the original path, but sometimes just letting him go, he would tell you some really incredible moments and nuggets about different things that happen. So worth a listen for me. I don't know what you thought, but I certainly enjoyed it. Mike is a probably not a entirely familiar name with a lot of our younger fans, but now you may know that there's guys like him in our industry that have left a massive impact, and it's cool to hear their stories and remember the role they played. So pretty awesome. Like I say, I'd seen this guy's name on my dad's car. I did not quite understand it. I didn't know why it wasn't Curb Records. I always wondered why just his name. I always wondered how the Hodgson got on the hood. It was over here with Bud Moore. Now it's here. He really put all that together for me. Helped me understand. I really didn't know how all that stuff kind of coexisted and why he couldn't have Curb Records. If Curb Records existed back then or whatever, whether he was the president of MGM, I don't know. But he explains why he couldn't put any of those businesses on the side of the car back then, and pretty interesting to just have Mike Curb's production on the car. But just crazy cool, fun. Glad I got to talk to him about music, and always had a little dream in the back of my mind of what it might have been like to have pursued a life or career in the music industry on the business side of it, on the discovery side of it. That would have been a lot of fun, a lot of challenges, not always fun, but rewarding. And so I'm curious to know more about that. So that was fun to discuss it. I feel like this was a home run. I feel like this is everything I hoped it would be. We end the season strong with our Ally guest segments, and we want to thank Ally for everything they do. They've supported us so incredibly all year long. They're a partner of mine, and I feel every time I see that commercial during the broadcasts where we talk about saving money, and I'm honored that they asked me to do that. So I'm thankful that they invest in our industry, sponsoring Bowman full time, and they help keep NASCAR moving. A lot of people do, but they're one of those businesses that help keep NASCAR moving down the road, and they certainly support us well here. So thank you, Ally, and can't wait to see what we do next or what the future looks like for us as partners. But it's been a good season with all these guests that we've had this year. All right, it's time for the white flag this Wednesday. As we mentioned yesterday on the white flag, dropping every Sunday after every race. New this year for Dirty Mo Media was the Teardown. What an incredible show. Thank you, Jeff Gluck. Thank you, Jordan Bianchi, for being a partner with us. Thank you for trusting us with your property. Thank you for allowing us to showcase the incredible work that you both do, and allowing us to show that to more people in our industry. And I was so excited when I learned that we were going to be able to have the Teardown on our channels. I remember I was going to like Disney on Ice out in Durham in North Carolina, and I called Jeff and text Jordan. I said, "Hey, I am so excited about this. We're gonna have a lot of fun. It has been fun. They do an incredible job. They add legitimacy to Dirty Mo Media. So thank you for all the work that you've done this year." Their show dropped this past Sunday after the race, their reaction to the championship final weekend and championship winner Joey Logano. Dropping Monday was Door Bumper Clear with Joel Edmonds, and TJ was on that show. Those guys will have one more episode this year. They're going to do a Christmas episode, I think. So keep your eyes and ears open. Follow all of our social handles to keep up to date, because we're going to create a lot of content this off season. Usually, this is it. This is the show. We shut down. We take the rest of the winter off. Not this year. This year, we're coming back into the studio multiple times. I'm going to do several more Dale Jr. downloads. Amy's going to be a part of some of those. We're going to have some fun this off season. I've been looking forward to this. I've been telling Mike forever that we need to keep going. I don't know why we stop. So we'll see how it goes. Yesterday, the Dirty Air Show, me and TJ and the gang, we recapped Phoenix. And then Actions Detrimental with Denny Hamlin came out as well on Tuesday. We'll give Denny a break. Dude has been on it all year, doing an incredible job with Actions Detrimental. How lucky are we to have a driver currently in the middle, in the mix, battling, trying to win championships, trying to win races, coming home immediately, sitting down, and giving us his interpretation of the weekend. We're lucky. Thank you, Denny Hamlin. Thank you for everyone who works on Actions Detrimental for the incredible content that y'all created this year. That was a lot of fun. Dropping today, Speed Street with Connor Daly and Chase Holden. All right, so you want to listen to that episode as well. Thank you, Connor, again, for teaming up, for trusting Dirty Mo Media over the last couple of years. We've loved him being part of the team. This is the coolest dude. Everybody knows Connor's cool. I'm not telling you nothing new. But this year we brought in Chase Holden, and we were looking for whatever that ingredient was that was going to be the missing component for Connor Daly and Speed Street, and Chase has filled that void. He's filled that role perfectly. I think they really work well together. Chase knows what he's talking about. He's a big fan of motorsports and always comes with some great input. Dropping tomorrow, we'll have DJD Reloaded. This is different this week. DJD Reloaded's been awesome this year. Every Thursday. Been kicking ass with that show. But this week's going to be a little different. This will be the first episode of Herman Schrader, our new show with Kenny Wallace and Kenny Schrader. All right, that'll be the Thursday episode of Reloaded, DJD Reloaded. So you'll want to tune in for that. You don't want to miss the first one. This is going to be an epic series with the two Kennys, so you don't want to miss the very first one. Everybody's been waiting on this. Clock is ticking. There's a clock somewhere in the corner counting down to the moment that show starts. It's been a fun week. Again, I say we're not done. We're going to have more content, but it's been a fun day. And but I'm going to wrap it up. I'll see y'all later.